Welcome to the Digital E-commerce podcast, where we explore cutting-edge idea and transformative strategies in the world of business and technology. I'm your host, Dylan Lam, and today we are diving deep into the fascinating intersection of market, patent, and super intelligence. Joining us today is a market designer and game theorist with a mission to create better economic system. With a background in the nuclear engineering and experience in tech startup during the dot-com bubble, Noah has dedicated himself rethinking the commodity market design. His work is backed by patent pending design and a wealth of expertise in the mathematics of information of computation. Noah, would you like to introduce you, please?
Well, you did a pretty great job there already, Dylan. It's great to be here. Yeah, I'm currently the patent pending is become quite the winding road. I'm currently suing the in federal circuit around their criminal violation of their procedures and pretty stunning lack of technical capacity to generate an argument. And looking around the world for people that would like to have an economy.
Okay, cool. Like for our audience context, what we can learn from Noah today is to understand what is the process like when it comes to suing the government about the patent. Because as in like a digital branding, or if you're an e-commerce brand, if you're like in a niche, sometimes you're creating patents, sometimes you're creating design patent or trademark, right? But when it comes to suing them, most of us just don't know the process or don't know where to start with. So Noah today is going to be helping on giving us a context about what is he getting himself into, and then what can we do as well in the future if we have the same situation. So Noah, would you like to tell us more about like the problem that you?
Yeah, sure. Well, the first thing is to sort of figure out whether or not a patent is useful to pursue. The USPTO actually handles four broad types of IP. Trademark that you mentioned is what the T in USPTO stands for. Copyright, which if you plan on having some commercial use or you're going for hire, then you should do something about. But copyright is in fact intrinsic, so you can just like grab a post-it note and jot something on it, and you're done. That was if the thing that you jotted on that post-it note is going to Sotheby's to be auctioned off for millions of dollars, you you should be doing something about it. Otherwise, it's basically just fine. Trade secret is a common alternative to patent and can be superior for some applications. So if you have some kind of process that makes your factory floor much, much more efficient, and you don't want other people to be able to infringe on that, you could use trade secret in order to be able to keep other people from being able to spread that information around. Patents are specifically when you have a design or system or other thing that is within the realm of patentability that would be reverse engineerable relatively easily, so it couldn't be kept secret. And so under those circumstances, since you're essentially telling the world what you've come up with anyway, you can acquire patent protection where the US government will actually work to restrict other people's use of your technology without your permission. So once you've actually determined that you have patentable IP, and that patenting it is the desirable way to actually exploit it, because bear in mind, patents are of limited term. They last for about 20 years. So things like penicillin, which were a patent medicine, aren't anymore because that was a long time ago. Once you've done that, you apply for the patent. Now, there's two stages to essentially, and I used both of them. You can apply for a provisional patent. This is easy. I just went on LegalZoom and put something together. Your description can be quite vague. It only needs to be sort of accurate enough that when you make your full patent application, it is clear that you're still talking about the same subject. And so for medium and large companies with intellectual property interests, they do these things strategically. They will file provisional patents on technologies they haven't necessarily even developed yet, but are interested in potentially developing in order to sort of lock the space down. A provisional patent lasts for a year and has no protections attached to it aside from the fact that it got your foot in the door, so to speak. Because a conflict of patents, one of the ways they can be resolved is by precedence, and the filing time is the precedence. So if you and I both have this idea that silly putty is going to be the next big technical breakthrough, and I go to the lab and start developing a new silly putty based technology, and you file a handful of provisional patents around potential silly putty based technologies, and then I file my patent, and then you not quite plagiarize, but essentially file your patents based on the technology that I reveal in my patents, you would be first to file because of those earlier provisional patents, in spite of the fact that I may have actually made the discovery first. In my case, and this is another big thing to be aware of, if you have a patentable idea, you can't talk about it very much. Once an idea is public, it is no longer patentable. So you don't want to talk to reporters. You don't really want to talk too much to other people about it, because if it's a public domain idea, it cannot then be patented. That's my major reason for the provisional patent. I needed to kind of get out and about and search for an attorney to help me out with it. Experienced sort of inventors will tell you that you don't need an attorney. I'm sure that they don't. I felt that having one was quite useful. The patent procedure is fairly intricate, and I needed a lot of hand to sort of figure out what the right things to do were. And there are a lot of different options depending on how much money you have, how interested in privacy you are, and so on. But just to continue the process, you will then be assigned a effectively a patent clerk, an examiner, and their job is to take a look at what your patent, make a decision about whether or not it is patentable. Generally speaking, they also negotiate. There's two interests. The patent office would like to either reject out of hand or provide as narrow a patent as possible. Whereas as the inventor, you're interested in as broad a patent as possible, but you still want it to be solid. Even if you could get the patent office to sign off on a patent on literally everything humans will ever invent, that is unlikely to stand up in court. So you want some kind of solid basis for your patent for being able to stand up to scrutiny down the line. Many patents are abandoned during this stage. Either what you were looking for doesn't accord, so no meeting of the minds can be achieved, or it's entirely possible that whatever you're trying to invent has already been invented, or enough of it has already been invented that whatever you could add isn't worth it to you. And so that has, abandoned patents are still public, and so abandoned patents provide prior art for future patents. So if you try to patent something that you've been working on and it's sort of overbroad and it doesn't work very well through the system and it's just not worth it anymore, and then you go back into the lab and come up with some refined technology and try to patent that, your own failed previous patent attempt will be prior art for your new system. And so you'll have to sort of navigate that circumstance. If you get through all, you'll be issued a notice of acceptance, and you can then pay the fee, and you will get a patent. However, there is a procedure. There's a quality control group inside the patent office, and they can sort of override. So they can send out a letter of withdrawal. This is the ordinary procedure for taking back that, and it can only be taken back on the grounds that it was never patentable in the first place. In my specific case, they didn't do that. They never issued the letter of withdrawal. This was back in 2020 that they broke their own procedure. And since 2020, I've been going back and forth. They've presented two different arguments, both of which were logically unsound for why my thing was never patentable in the first place. I have two notice acceptances, but only one letter of withdrawal. And you can appeal decisions that are made by your examiner and QC's overriding your examiner to something called the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, which I did. And in addition to the arguments that existed, there was also a precedential case from 2019 where they ruled that market systems role for a market system coming out of the CME group. The Patent Trial and Appeal Board chose to ignore the vast majority of the history of the case to quote parts of my case out of context in order to justify basically entirely evidence-free assertions by the patent examiner, who I've been told the examiner and his supervisor were in communication with my attorneys at the time. I was told that they were essentially under orders from QC that they didn't agree with, but had no power to overcome. So they sort of gun to the head just wrote out, we don't think so, without any supporting evidence. And the administrative patent judges rewrote their own precedent in a way which fails on its to claim that the previous precedent doesn't apply to my case because the previous precedent applies to computers in markets, and my case, which is about making computers in markets work vastly better, somehow doesn't apply to computers in markets. So the step after, once you're completely done with the patent office, your next step, should you choose to take it, is to appeal. There's a couple different ways to appeal, but basically the only meaningful one in this case is to the appellate court for the Federal Circuit, which is effectively the second highest court in the country. You have to serve the director and head attorney of the patent office and let them know you're doing it. And then put your brief together. You get 63 days to make your case. They get 30 days to rebut, although they're attempting to extend that for another 30 days. And then you get, I think it's 14 days, you get 2 weeks to the rebuttal. And then a panel of judges will make a decision. That decision hypothetically can be appealed to the Supreme Court if either side feels that it was made in error. And of course, in our system, that is the absolute end of the.
Right, but that is insightful. It's long, insightful. I have a patent, you should say e-commerce patent. We designed a jacket into a utility. That's what I actually experienced. I actually just got the patent like 2 months ago, and it was like a long process. What you just mentioned earlier on is what I've experienced. We don't have to rebuttal the whole decision process. And our patent, I think it's quite original. So one question is your patent original, or was it because there is it was from a other patent and then come up with a different one, and that's why there's a problem with it?
So they've admitted that there's absolutely no prior art. They've brought up 5 different patent attempts in order to establish prior art. The most substantive of which is something that they call the Lang patent. This group of people wrote like an 800-page document and essentially attempted to patent every single kind of parimutuel game that they could imagine. The description of my patent uses the word parimutuel, so it was fair. These guys patented an infinite number of parimutuel games. Unfortunately, the class of infinity to which they patented is a lower class of infinity to the infinity that I'm operating within. So I am outside and beyond the length. Also, the length doesn't really conceive of positive sum parimutuel systems, and my parimutuel system is in fact positive sum. So those two things meant that the Lang patent was effectively irrelevant. Other attempts at various market adjustments were brought up, and they are all effectively micro changes to existing market models, because this actually involves a very different market model, which nobody's ever used. I cannot say that nobody's ever conceived of it before, because there might be some lost manuscript or some top secret file someplace that somebody has, but there's nothing in the public domain that I or my attorneys or the patent office could find that is similar to this. So instead, their first claim was that it wasn't patentable because it was useless. It was no better than systems that presently existed. That's a spurious and impossible to maintain claim. Essentially, this would reduce the information processing required to operate markets by factors of millions, because of the algorithmic improvements that would be involved. That getting past essentially requires you to equate the numbers 1, 2. So in 2022, when the mathematical proof that I had submitted my lawyers got submitted to the patent office, and basically, they were told, if you want to defend 1 = 2 in court, they relented, and that's when I got the second acceptance. The second withdrawal was based on the notion, essentially, you're not allowed to patent certain very fundamental ideas and things, and so they claimed that I was essentially patenting economic theory, that I would control the economy should this patent be granted. That's also, this device is similar to well, it's much more sophisticated, but similar in stature to something like a ticker tape machine. And indeed, people using ticker tape machines dominated people that were not using ticker tape machines, but that doesn't mean that like shopkeepers and other economic activity didn't continue in the light of those kinds of upgrades. So that's also not a sustainable claim. The people that wrote it, at least privately, dispute, and no evidence for it has been brought up by anybody, in fact, because there can't be. And it essentially lies on misinterpreting language that the patent office actually dictated. So we had conversations about narrowing the scope of the patent through 2018, 2019, and so on. And the patent office told us that if we wrote it the way that it is currently written, that it would not be expansive in the way that they're claiming that it now is. So even if you take the proposition that you can read this and make expansive claims, the record still exists that it was specifically drafted not to be expansive. Again, the PTAB explicitly chose not to look at the record in order to establish that they decided to uphold. So I've made all of that quite explicit in my case, which is currently, and kind of we'll see where it goes. But the patent office has been forced to admit that it's better than everything that currently exists, and nothing like it has ever existed before. So they have very little room to maneuver to deny it as a patent.
Can you explain more in depth? Like you talk about a ticker tape machine, ticker tape machine. Am I correct?
Yeah. Well, so Markets are information processing and communication devices.
Yeah.
They find price information and they spread it around. Ticker tape machines were effectively dedicated machines that could move price information over the telegraph lines, and that allowed for much wider geographic distribution of market participants than had existed prior to that breakthrough. Basically, all market participants were in the pits in London or New York or Chicago or wherever the market existed, and you would go down into the pit and shout at each other and figure out what was going on. With the
Right.
introduction of telephony, and now the internet, we've been upgrading the sort of distributive nature of the marketplace and getting it to be networked. The downside of all of that is that the amount of information that's being processed has exploded. So something like the CME group generates more than a petabyte a year in data, and that's equivalent to like the entire lifespan of a human being's information. No human body can process that much information, and so we're essentially over egging the batter, if you will. It's become more noise than signal, and so I found a way to effectively isolate and communicate that signal in a radically more efficient way by changing the market structure from a buyer-seller paradigm to this three-way producer-consumer negotiator paradigm, and built a machine that can sit between those three parties, where people essentially decide how much of each party they wish to participate in, and create a marketplace that works not the same as, but with the same outcomes as present market. And no one's ever done that before.
Amazing. I mean, I'm trying to listen the idea of what you have there, and I think that's why it's being patented. It's like it's not existed in the market. That's why like you are trying to struggle with the group about like how to get it right. Like okay, but then let's move it a bit like back to the e-commerce part or digital marketing podcast. Right? Say like you also mentioned about super intelligence. What kind of what kind of idea is that? Could you explain a little bit about like?
Yeah, absolutely. So markets are actually the first super intelligent technology that human beings ever developed, and they basically caused the Renaissance. So it's well that human beings working together can make decisions that are better than any of the human beings working alone can produce. I'll spoil something a bit. Have you ever heard of the Arctic survival sort of test or business
Ooh,
case?
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So there's this thing that you can do with teams to demonstrate synergy, where you get a bunch of people and you give them this scenario where they're stranded in northern Canada. And, they have 25, I think it's items that they need to rank in terms of importance. And so they do this individually, and then you put them into small groups, and you have the groups create those things as well. And what you'll find almost all the time is that the worst group in your seminar will outperform the best person in your seminar, and every group will outperform all the people that were in that group. So that's an example of ways in which people can put our heads together and do things that are better than we can do by ourselves. And markets are a mechanism. It's focused. It doesn't, it won't write poetry and figure out what's making your kids sick and all the rest of that stuff that we're doing with these modern tools. But it figures out how to manage a distributed economy, and it allows a few dozen people, or in these days, tens of millions of people to come together to make these joint decisions in very good ways. And it did so tellingly by working out the incentives first and then allowing the participants to essentially work out how to maximize those incentives in order to get the super intelligent decision. And so to me, this is a very strong indicator that our current approaches to AI are in two very distinct camps. There's the LLMs that are getting a lot of, media attention, and there's reinforcement learning, which is getting a lot less media attention, but doing much, much more impressive things. And the reinforcement learning stuff, which is creating these chess bots and poker bots, creating new systems to read X-rays and generate new crystal structures and folding proteins and unfolding proteins. They all start with an alignment problem that then the computer needs to maximize its ability to solve. Whereas the LLMs are open-ended. They're trying to prove the capacity, but we're now having these very strong debates about how you're supposed to manage these things, and the management's going very, very poorly. And I'd suggest that's because you actually have to do it up front, and they haven't. So they will ultimately have to scrap everything they've done and start over again from an alignment first perspective in order to actually reach usable superintelligence. And so from that perspective, by changing this structure from a two-sided to a three-participant marketplace, that creates a more super intelligently aligned system of markets. And so the mechanism that enables that switch becomes the thing that I'm patenting, and the goal is these smarter marketplaces.
Amazing. I mean, the idea that you have there, I mean, I'm sure that takes a lot of time and resources that you have invested into that in order to create that. What are you looking ahead? Like, what's next for your work, and how do you see your design being implemented on a larger scale?
Well, there's two different strategies that I'm pursuing. The first one, which I've been doing for quite some time, is that it's open source, right? It's on Creative Commons, I believe 4.0. There's a thing up GitHub. A friend of mine wrote up with just some basic code that does some basic pieces. And there are 4 separate projects around the planet that are trying to get off the ground incorporating this technology. And so encouraging them, in one case, I have a sort of tightly coupled interest. There's an where I might have a tightly coupled interest. They're still trying to, get their funding. And finding those kinds of projects, introducing the notion and supporting them to the degree that I can is sort of prong number one. Prong number two is the companies that have the resources and connections to do these things quite rapidly aren't really interested in intellectual property that they can't own, either through some sort of exclusive licensing deal or just buying outright. The Lang patent, which I'd mentioned before, is currently the property of the CME Group, for example. So the patent is essentially an entire second front of approaches, and so that's a pretty big one. I submit my case. It's about 15 pages long. The informal brief earlier this month. They're due. I think it's December 10th is when they would need to. They've just put in a request to extend it over my objections, and we'll see where that goes. One of the points is that since the Patent and Trademark, Patent Trial and Appeal Board judges made what looks to me to be a egregiously false statement that again fails on its own face, their fitness for employment is called into question by a mistake of this magnitude. Effectively, they claimed that a prior precedent only applies to improving computer use, and therefore my patent, which improves computer use, doesn't apply. So that's sort of instantly self-contradictory. So the attorney that's handling the patent office's case says that since he has two other cases ongoing, that he doesn't really have the time and he wants an extra month. One of those two cases, according to CERT, is actually a dispute. I don't know what the context of the dispute is, but a dispute with a PTAB ruling, which means that if the result of my case is that the judges in patent court aren't really up to snuff, then that case, which is actually due after my case should be adjudicated ahead of theirs, because if we delay until I'm after them and the ruling comes down and then my ruling comes down that the administrative patent judges are incompetent, then their ruling might effectively become so I made a handful of points to the judges, and I haven't heard back yet whether their extension will be accepted. If it is, they'll be filing in early January, and if they actually file any case at all, I'll have 2 weeks to rebut that, and then that will go to the judge.
Right, amazing. How can our listeners support your mission or learn more about your work?
Well, there is a petition up on change.org under CDM patent. So signing that is fantastic. But outreach to me is sort of either you can find me on LinkedIn at Noah, or my email address, noahphealy@yahoo.com. If you're interested in learning more about, there's a website. I've got a handful of sort of explanatory videos up, and just kind of generally spreading the word about how to upgrade the economy. Learning is all great for me.
Right, and that wraps up today's episode. If you guys enjoy the episode, if you guys want to know about the website, I'm going to put it in the show notes. It's COORDISC, which is the Noah website there. So just don't forget to like and subscribe our YouTube channel if you guys enjoy it. If you guys want to know more about him, we'll just make sure that we put it in the show notes.